The markets are closing the books on 2025, but the geopolitical ledger remains wide open. It's defined by what analysts are calling a fragile interregnum, an aggressive testing of existing conflict dynamics ahead of the anticipated U.S. presidential transition. And this period of high instability is visible simultaneously across three major theaters: Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the Caribbean.
This is Neural Pulse, the final briefing of 2025.
Let's start where the stakes are, well, arguably the highest. The Eastern Front. The conflict in Ukraine has entered a negotiation pre-stage, and it's being dominated by these competing, very high-risk peace proposals.
Right. And the primary document driving that conversation is the U.S.-backed 28-point peace plan. It signals a fundamental shift in Washington's doctrine. I mean, they're clearly moving away from supporting full territorial integrity.
And prioritizing what? Just a rapid end to the fighting?
A rapid cessation of hostilities, yes. And the details of that shift are what should concern every European capital. This plan reportedly demands significant territorial cession from Kyiv. It formalizes the loss of large chunks of land, and, critically, it imposes serious caps on the size and capability of the Ukrainian military.
So the choice for Kyiv is basically accept a coerced peace or risk losing their main backer.
That's the essence of coercive diplomacy.
But this U.S. strategy, this quick exit, it's immediately created a massive transatlantic fracture. The key European powers, France, Germany, the UK, they responded almost immediately with a counterproposal.
And their document is a direct rejection of Washington's terms. It really is. The European plan explicitly rejects any further territorial cession beyond the current contact line.
So they're holding the line, literally.
They are. And they're also advocating for a much higher cap on Ukrainian military personnel. But here's the major strategic insight for you, and it comes down to money. The European proposal specifically removes U.S. control over frozen Russian assets.
That's a profound move.
It is. It gives that control back to a multilateral European body. It highlights that Washington is focused on pivoting strategic resources, probably to the Pacific.
While Europe is left dealing with a destabilized continent for the next decade, their interests are clearly diverging.
Exactly. And while these diplomatic chess moves are underway, they're being complicated by threats on the ground. Take the alleged drone attack on December 29th, targeting President Putin's Valdai residence.
The one with the 91 long-range drones, all intercepted.
That's the claim. Russian sources say 91 drones, all successfully intercepted.
That sounds less like a real attack and more like a script. What's the credibility assessment here? I mean, if it were a real deep strike of that scale, wouldn't we expect immediate open-source confirmation, local media, geolocated footage?
We would, and that confirmation is notably absent. Foreign Minister Lavrov was very quick to frame this as state terrorism, declaring Russia would immediately revise its negotiation stance.
So it fits a pattern.
It fits the classic false flag dynamic we've seen before large-scale Russian offensives. The most likely assessment is they are leveraging this claim to pressure the incoming U.S. administration for more concessions. They manufacture the justification, then they push for maximal demands.
And that pattern of aggressive pre-transition testing, it seems to be playing out elsewhere, which brings us straight to the Caribbean.
Precisely. This high-stakes coercion is not localized. It's playing out simultaneously on the high seas.
Okay, let's shift to the Caribbean crisis. The U.S. has operationalized what it officially calls a maritime quarantine around Venezuela.
Which is, for all intents and purposes, a de facto naval blockade.
Right. It involves roughly 15,000 personnel. The mission is clear. Interdict oil tankers linked to the Maduro regime and, well, sever the country's economic lifeline. We've already seen concrete examples like the seizure of the Skipper and Century's vessels.
The legal pretext for this operation is what demands your attention because it's profoundly controversial. The U.S. designated Maduro's regime as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO.
And that designation is the key.
It's everything. It allows the blockade to be framed legally as counter-narcotics or anti-terrorism law enforcement. It bypasses the need for a declaration of war or, crucially, a resolution from the UN Security Council.
So by labeling this an FTO action, Washington is essentially trying to rewrite the rules of maritime engagement on the fly.
That's exactly the analysis, and the blowback has been intense. China, which imports a staggering 80% of Venezuela's oil, quickly condemned it as international piracy.
And Russia.
Russia demonstrated support with accelerated economic projects and, more alarmingly, reports that their military advisors inside Venezuela have shifted to war alert status.
But the major risk for you to consider looking at 2026 has to be the precedent this sets.
Absolutely. Analysts universally view Venezuela as a testing ground. If the U.S. succeeds in normalizing the seizure of sovereign flag vessels under this FTO pretext,
This legal sleight of hand.
then that precedent could easily be applied to other geopolitical choke points. Think about the Persian Gulf or the South China Sea. It dangerously widens the scope for a global maritime conflict.
And that maximalist strategy regime change via pressure is paralleled by the approach we're seeing in the Middle East.
It is. And what's fascinating here is the clarity of the message from the December 29th meeting between the incoming U.S. administration and the Israeli prime minister. We're seeing a definitive return to the maximum pressure campaign against Iran.
That meeting generated a very explicit, very public threat from the incoming U.S. president that if Iran attempts to rebuild its nuclear facilities, the U.S. will, quote, have to knock them down.
And the enormous risk here is miscalculation. It's driven by the gap between the political narrative and the technical reality. Politically, the narrative is that Iran's nuclear program was obliterated back in June.
But the intelligence suggests something very different.
Very different. The intelligence suggests Iran suffered only a few months setback. The IAEA still reports that Tehran is enriching uranium up to 60% purity, which is, just steps from weapons grade.
So if the new administration feels compelled to validate its claims, it creates a dangerous pressure point for preemptive action.
Yes. And adding to this, we see major friction on the Israeli-Palestinian file. The Gaza truce is fragile, and you hear growing murmurs of Netanyahu fatigue among some U.S. advisors.
And the key strategic leverage being applied now is tied to Saudi Arabia.
It's all tied to Saudi alignment. The U.S. is reportedly pushing Israel to reverse West Bank policies, especially curbing settlement expansion, to keep the path open for an expanded Abraham Accords. Netanyahu now has to perform an impossible balancing act between his far-right coalition and the strategic need for Saudi alignment.
And further complicating things, Israel moved to suspend operations for over 20 international organizations, including Doctors Without Borders, starting January 1st. That kind of administrative warfare just raises regional temperatures.
And while these great powers are testing their limits, we can't ignore how peripheral conflicts are also reshaping borders, especially across Africa.
Let's turn to that. The African instability arc, starting with the geoeconomics of Sudan's collapse. The critical development in December was the capture of the Heglig oil field by the RSF.
And Heglig is so much more than just an oil field. It's the economic engine of Sudan and, crucially, a vital node for South Sudan's oil exports. The loss of Heglig effectively ends the Safish government's monopoly on state sovereignty.
So it solidifies a move toward a Libya-style scenario, two competing governments.
That's the trajectory. The RSF now physically chokes the key oil pipeline, giving them leverage over South Sudan. They've built an independent, resource-based economic foundation.
And that fragmentation is paralleled by a huge diplomatic shakeup in the Horn of Africa, Israel becoming the first UN member state to officially recognize Somaliland.
A very strategically calculated move. The rationale is to secure Red Sea access and directly counter Iranian influence in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
But it comes at a high cost.
A very high cost. It immediately escalates tensions with Somalia and Egypt, who see it as a severe breach of sovereignty. It risks pulling in Gulf states and Turkey into a wider proxy confrontation.
These conflicts, whether in Europe or the Red Sea, have driven capital movements that reveal deep market anxieties as the year closes. Let's look at the economic signals for 2026.
We're seeing a powerful, almost vertical flight to safety rotation. It reveals a deep decoupling of asset classes driven by fear.
The data is stark. Gold has spiked vertically to an all-time high, trading above $4,500 an ounce. Silver has also seen a massive rally.
Right. Investors are running to tangible assets. Now, contrast that with the crypto sector. Bitcoin has stagnated, trading near $88,000, failing to reach that widely expected $100,000 psychological mark.
So the implication for 2026 is pretty clear.
It is. Geopolitical stress confirms that institutional investors prioritize the tangible liquidity of bullion over the theoretical safety of digital gold. When nation-state risk is this high, people want something physical they can hold.
Meanwhile, the U.S. economy shows a worrying divergence. The S&P 500 maintains very high values, driven by AI and service optimism.
Even as the ISM manufacturing PMI remains stubbornly in the contraction zone below 50.
That disconnect feels like a structural fissure.
It is. It means the current rally is built on the promise of future tech, masking weakness in physical production. That makes the entire U.S. economic base brittle.
And if we look across the Pacific, the luxury sector is flashing a warning. LVNH's third-quarter revenue dropped 10% year-over-year.
And this decline is indicative of a stealth wealth phenomenon in China. Consumers are retreating from conspicuous consumption that suggests deeper structural issues, limiting China's capacity to lead any kind of global reflation effort in 2026.
Finally, the non-kinetic threats. We saw that massive DDoS attack by the pro-Russian group Nanamen 057 against French critical infrastructure right during the Christmas period.
And that just reaffirms that the conflict in Ukraine is now routinely flowing into attacks on NATO civilian infrastructure. The goal isn't military dominance, it's eroding domestic trust, causing chaos, and normalizing hybrid warfare against civilian targets.
So to synthesize this for our listeners,
The confluence of a high-stakes diplomatic surrender in Ukraine, a threatened regional war with Iran, and the dangerous maritime precedent in the Caribbean creates a complex polycrisis environment. Threats are feeding into one another.
so what does this all mean for you entering 2026? We see three primary risks you need to monitor. First, diplomatic failure. If the U.S. peace plan is rejected, expect a rapid military escalation in the Eastern Front.
Second, maritime choke point normalization. The Venezuelan precedent raises insurance and logistics costs globally and poses a tangible threat of similar confrontations in the Persian Gulf or South China Sea.
And third, commodity volatility. The combination of supply-side risk from places like Sudan and Venezuela, alongside financial anxiety driving record gold demand, points to a highly unpredictable year for all commodities.
The fragile interregnum of late 2025 was not a pause. It was a high-stakes bargaining period, setting the stage for decisive, high-consequence shifts in the coming year. What decisive action will follow this period of aggressive testing is the question you must answer for your organization. Neural Pulse. Clarity in a complex world. Have a powerful New Year. See you in 2026.